Great. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Purpose Group to start with. Sorry, I've realised I'm seeing an awkward window, so then we might have the sunlight coming in and out. But since this is the first Purpose Group session of the year, we just thought it'd be helpful to introduce before we go into the big theme of pivoting into purpose at this time. We thought it'd be helpful to kind of give an overview of what our plans are for the Purpose Group for this year, and how things have maybe changed due to the current situation. So the Purpose Group was set up at the beginning of this year in early February. We have a fabulous sponsor, Media HQ, Jack Murray and his team. I'm not sure if they're joining this morning, but big thanks to them. And you probably would have seen the page on the PRCA website, which outlines our objectives. So just sort of on the slides here, hopefully, which you can see, just in terms of what we're really looking to achieve as communications professionals in terms of driving purpose throughout communications for businesses, for our clients, for our agencies. Oh, sorry, sorry. And then you can just see here our business as unusual pre-COVID calendar of events which we had planned. So for the year ahead, we'd really kind of lined out a few different things which we wanted to do. So this was supposed to be an in-person workshop to really set the tone and really talk to everyone about what their understanding of purpose is, and to kind of make it into a workshop. Obviously, we've had to move that online, so it's a slightly different format, but we hope to maybe go back to that at some point during the year. We also had a high-level event planned, a speaker event, in June ahead of Cannes, and then another event around the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, ahead of the UN General Assembly in September. And then another guest speaker event followed by Christmas drinks in December, ahead of Davos and World Economic Forum. So that was kind of our plan. As I say, we're adapting slightly, bringing this workshop online. We'll have to see how the rest of the year goes, and if we end up bringing other things online as well, or if we can actually do something hopefully in person later on in the year. Chloe's going to talk a bit about the end of year report as well, which we have planned.
So yeah, the aim for us is to gather information and feedback throughout the year. As Daniela said, it was really looking at kind of workshops and also a number of speaker events and some key focus points through the year. Moments which may have changed, may go online, but also we will still look at those themes and also the need for the communication industry as a whole. But we're looking at pulling together a report for the end of the year, which is a report fit for a post-COVID world at this point. So whilst we are not sure what will come next, everyone on this call has taken time in their day because they care about the issues that we face. So thank you. We will now talk through the following slides for 30 or 40 minutes, at the end of which questions which have been submitted in the chat box, as Kiri said at the beginning, will be answered. We have quite a lot of people who signed up to join, so if we run out of time, we can still answer the questions, but via the PRCA. We'd love to make it an interactive session, but as I say, there are a lot of people, so we're going to whiz through our slides, not take up too much of your morning with our talk, but really try and get some key points across and plant some seeds really for some of those questions. We'll also be running a live poll, which Daniela can explain, and which we have here coming up on the screen.
Yes, hopefully you can all see that on the screen. So we decided that since we're not able to all sit together in person, it might be nice to do just sort of a live poll during the session. So if you go onto Twitter, hopefully you can enter the hashtag PRCA Purpose, and you should have these questions that come up. And it'd be great if during the session at some point, when you're not listening in between, if you can go on and vote on some of these, all of these questions, hopefully. So we've got the first one: when returning to, oh, sorry, I just moved to the wrong slide. When returning to business as usual after COVID, which aspect of lockdown life would you like to keep? Working, schooling from home, fewer cars, less traffic on the roads, higher pay for essential workers, less air travel, progress on which social issue, sorry, that's the question one. Second one is progress on which social issue is most at risk due to COVID. So we've got mental health, gender equality, racial equality, and climate change. And the third one is, has your opinion of certain companies been changed by how they've responded to the COVID crisis? Yes, no, or don't know. So hopefully you can see all the questions there. And when you go on, as I say, to Twitter, you'll be able to see the questions there, and you can take a vote on it, and then we'll come back at the end and do a little poll and give you the results. I think probably is a good time to start now in terms of what is purpose. Of course, today we're going to be focusing on purpose in the current context, both during and after COVID. But since this is the first purpose group gathering, we really wanted to start by sharing our view of purpose in normal times. So I think it's worth noting that when we talk about purpose, we're not talking about philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. Over the last 5 years, we've seen the trend really shifting from CSR to social purpose. And I think what's important to note here is that purpose is really integral to the business model. It's not a nice to have, which I think CSR was traditionally seen to be. Also relevant is the joint company and community value creation here. So you can see on the social purpose side that kind of combination, which is something we're really seeing at the moment during the crisis. And I think it's interesting that what was previously maybe a low priority or was maybe something that was a responsibility of someone else in the business, purpose has really become firmly the responsibility of the communications teams within organizations, and also importantly the C-suite. And you really see that CEOs are really now pushing the purpose agenda from the top. So this is what we call the age of purpose, because companies are now expected to demonstrate that they're part of the conversation about society's biggest issues, and they really need to take a stand on issues such as climate change, gender and ethnic equality, etc. Over the past couple of years, we've really seen companies starting to put purpose, if not before, then at least alongside profit. We've seen, the letters from Larry Fink at BlackRock to clients and company CEOs. We've seen the Business Roundtable in the US and the FT's new agenda. So what are some of society's biggest challenges? There are a lot, but this is just a sort of a snapshot of some of the ones which we think, are the most relevant in the current environment. So these are all issues that many of us will feel really passionate about as individuals, but also as consumers, employees, entrepreneurs, business leaders and investors. And we've seen, government failings in a lot of countries, and that means that businesses and CEOs are stepping in to fill the gap and address these issues, whether that's alone, as an industry, or across sectors. We found that individual purpose really feeds into collective purpose, which leads to collective action. And this is something we're certainly seeing at the moment. So whether you're working in a PR agency, building your own business, scaling a startup, or working within a large organization, you can align your goals with one of these challenges and really make a positive impact in society. And not only is being a purpose-driven business about helping society or your own personal fulfillment, but it's also fundamental in today's world for the success of your business. So you can see here sort of, in terms of driving business goals, it really helps to energize employees, build a positive culture. It will help you to attract investors, have your brand stand out, and win the war for talent, amongst other things. But there are some barriers. It's obviously a very crowded space, particularly at the moment. So how can you be heard? And it is a challenge. We have here what we call the 3 A's. So articulation. Do you know what to say and how to say it? Attention, will you be heard and will you stand out? And the key one, authenticity, will you be believed? And I think it's really important to bear these in mind when you're looking at what you're saying and how you're articulating your purpose. So as a business, how do you do purpose well? These are just a few key points that we advise on companies and organizations. The couple which I just wanted to pick out here is, as I mentioned before, your purpose has to be aligned to the core of your business. I think that's really important. You have to be authentic. You have to focus on a singular challenge, and transparency and honesty are key. So doing purpose well is important, particularly now and particularly for certain demographics. We've seen how millennials and Gen Z are driving the purpose agenda. It's a really important new demographic, as millennials and Gen Z will actually make up 2/3 of the global population. We recently conducted some research, which is called the Purpose Polls, and it's how millennial and Gen Z consumers, employees and activists will shape the world in the years ahead. Although this was carried out before COVID-19, there are some key findings that I thought would be worth mentioning here. So you can see on this chart here that climate change is the most important issue, which we would expect, of course, but they are actually close. This is actually closely followed by challenges such as economic inequality. You've got home ownership there and job security, all of which will be exacerbated by this current crisis. And when it comes to attracting a talent, purpose is incredibly important. Women and ethnic minority groups are more likely to be drawn to companies that demonstrate a clear social purpose. You can see here in the charts, 59% of women and 69% of Black, British and mixed respondents choose, I think purpose is important when choosing their place of work. In terms of consumers, we have a majority here, 55%, that said that having a clear purpose beyond profit was important to them when selecting which brand to buy. And this slide just shows, if you can see it hopefully, 6 in 10, so 61% told us that it was important or very important that companies take a stance on the issues that matter to them. And having a clear social purpose is just as important as equal pay and nearly as important as being transparent. So I'm now going to hand back to Chloe. She's going to carry on with the next section.
Be helpful if I take mute off. So the great pause, as a number of journalists are terming the COVID-19 lockdown globally, the importance of this moment can't be understated, because in a society that's been hopelessly gridlocked for at least a decade around purpose, this moment of crisis, horrible as it is in so many ways, is also probably our only real chance at changing course. In order to avoid the catastrophic tipping point we had been heading towards, and many of us are aware of, we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. It's not only the planet that has been suffering in our lifetimes. We've also seen a lot of challenges around growing mental health issues, refugee crisis, pollution, waste, plastic, as well as growing levels of anxiety, depression, violence. During what is being termed as this great pause, we have seen encouraging information about the planet's response, whilst also going hand in hand with suicide helplines increasing by up to 200%, domestic violence helpline 700%, rate of anxiety, depression skyrocketing. These issues, which are hitting us now in a very clear way, have not come solely from the pandemic. They're already with us, but now they're supercharged. Mental health issues were already on the rise. The high street was already struggling. Suicide was the biggest killer of men under 45, and there were 2.4 million victims of domestic violence every year. And air pollution in 44 UK cities was above the WHO guidelines. These were the things talked about in the abstract before, but we are now feeling and living their impact. They were things that we had discussed, that companies had put initiatives behind, that their purpose drivers were surrounding. But in this moment, the question is, when we return to normal, are we pressing rewind or are we pressing play? We need at this point to figure out what our reset looks like. In the past month, Edelman has produced a special report on trust in the time of COVID. The survey covered 12 countries. The results showed that this is a moment in time for brands to step into their purpose and to join the fight. Some of the findings were 89% agreed that brands must shift to producing products that help people meet COVID-19 challenges, and we'll see some of those in a minute. 89% agreed that brands must offer free or lower priced products to essential workers, high risk, and those whose jobs have been affected. And 54% said that they are ignoring new products unless they are helping to deal with the pandemic. We also see that 62% believe that brands, 62% believe that brands are playing a critical role in the fight against the pandemic. 55% think that brands and companies respond more quickly and effectively than governments. you may have already made up your mind on that. 33% have already stopped using brands that haven't appropriately responded to the virus. And then we see the most trusted spokespeople are overwhelmingly scientists, health officials, and doctors. The question then comes, how do we collectively ensure that brands have stepped up, continue on a purpose trajectory, and don't slip backwards? We see here some of the brands that have been in the news a lot recently. LVMH producing 28 million surgical masks, Ralph Lauren pledging $10 million to help struggling businesses, Bentley Motors creating 30,000 3D face shields, Richemont pledging £44 million to help struggling South African companies. These are pledges to help in the current crisis, but these are brands who need to ensure that they keep their customers not only alive, but also able to buy their products in the long term without further interruption or pauses, and with the challenges that we will face in the coming months and years. Before COVID hit hard, COP25 took place in Madrid in December 2019. Students camped outside. However, the longest ever climate talks ended in deadlock. COP25 should have been about new science, ambitious targets, but instead, no one came out with pledges or solutions to make positive change. When we then cut to the impact of COVID and we look at how quickly commitments for immediate short-term change, funding and support came with positive environmental impact as a byproduct, we have to question what can be done for the future.
So thanks, Chloe. So what has been the business response to COVID? As Chloe said, there've been a lot of reactions from companies and companies really stepping up. Have they been driven by purpose or by profit? Really, businesses are being tested like never before. And I think what we've discovered is that how they respond now will not only impact how they survive the crisis, but how they'll reshape the relationship between business and society when we come out of this. People are really tracking companies and are going to hold them to account. When they reopen, they'll either support or boycott companies for the way they behave during this time. We've seen various good guys and bad guys lists circulating on Twitter. I also came across a website called didtheyhelp.com where you can enter any company or even celebrity to find out how they behaved during the pandemic. So what can we learn from the business response to COVID-19? There's a few points here. My co-founder Barry Johnson actually wrote an article on this, which you can read more about. And some of the themes that we identified were loyalty, leadership, innovation, and honesty. So loyalty, how you treat your staff, has really become a litmus test for corporate purpose. It's no good donating to a food bank if your employees are the ones using it. People are losing their jobs or being furloughed. And I'm sure that after the crisis, we're going to see more debate about living wages and sick pay, especially for contractors and freelancers. Leadership, obviously leadership matters in a time like this. We're seeing some companies really tightening their belts at the top, either cutting senior management pay and halting dividends instead of laying off employees. Innovation, companies really need to adapt and make sure that their products and services can be used for the greater good. Philanthropy is great. We've seen a lot of supermarkets donating to food banks, but also changing business hours and prioritizing vulnerable customers. Tech companies have dropped some of their charges or extended access to their products, especially around home learning. And as Chloe mentioned, a lot of luxury manufacturers now producing ventilators, hand sanitizer, and NHS gowns. And honesty, obviously we'll work in communications, so we know that open, honest communication is essential, and being transparent is the most important thing for building trust between brands and consumers at the moment. So companies that say one thing but do another will definitely be found out. I just wanted to kind of bring this to life, I guess, just with a few examples for each of those themes. Loyalty, in terms of how businesses treat their staff, is really being scrutinised. A lot of organisations have come under fire for mistreating or laying off their staff with no warning. Conversely, there have been other organisations that have really gone out on a limb for their employees and have been lauded for their loyalty. So firstly, maybe we'll take a look at some of these bad guys. I'm sure you've seen reports in the news. Wetherspoons, this is my local one in South East London, with graffiti all over it saying "Pay your staff." They laid off their employees. Some of their hours were cut, and even said so they wouldn't be able to pay some employees for hours they'd already worked. I think we all probably saw the letter, the right-hand corner letter there from Britannia Hotels. They not only fired their staff, but also evicted them from their accommodation with no notice and with no redundancy pay. Sports Direct and Waterstones, they both stayed open past requested lockdown, claiming, well, Mike Ashley claimed that fitness equipment was an essential good, and Waterstones said that bookstores were like supermarkets and pharmacies, which I think we can all agree probably has been very valuable, reading and doing exercise in this time. But it's really about the way that their employees were treated, the lack of protection and lack of care for their well-being. Some of the good guys, M&S is one that I think we've probably all been following closely. They've been really looking after their staff. They gave them a 15% pay increase. They closed the clothes shops and moved people just to the food department to kind of cater for that demand. As well as looking after their staff, they've also been looking after customers and wider society. So the donation of food and Easter eggs to the NHS and clothing care packs to NHS Nightingale patients as well. Gap and Asda are two other ones. Gap was applauded for closing stores early and committing to giving their employees full pay for the entirety of the lockdown. And Asda gave its vulnerable employees full pay during the outbreak. Obviously, this is kind of a rolling thing and companies are changing all the time, but I think we've seen companies coming out at the beginning and really making a stand. Either way, that's helped sort of set the tone, I think, for how a lot of other businesses have behaved. In terms of leadership, obviously that matters, particularly in times of crisis. We've seen the individuals and boards heading up companies are facing much more pressure than ever to support their staff, their communities, and the wider world. And people have really turned to C-suite leadership for reassurance and assistance. And it's crucial that these leaders really take action in this time of crisis and they live up to their promises. We've seen Unilever CEO, Alan Job, he promised to pay his employees, contractors and others on a full or part-time basis. That's the Hilton CEO, Chris Nassetta. He connected workers from temporarily suspended hotels with hundreds of thousands of short-term jobs at companies like Amazon that remain open and has pledged to hire them back as soon as possible. As well as internal policies, you've got a lot of CEOs pledging wider assistance, both financial and in other means. So a lot of the tech companies here, Microsoft CEO, the Apple CEO, Tesla CEO, they've all kind of contributed. And then obviously we've got Apple and Google who are currently been developing the COVID-19 tracker as well. When it comes to innovation, this is obviously a point that Chloe mentioned earlier. Obviously, several companies are supporting the fight to beat coronavirus by ensuring their products and services can be harnessed for the collective effort, which is really important. They're really going the extra mile to adapt their businesses and offer any resources they can to support the cause. So we've seen a lot of the supermarkets, as I say, step up. Co-op, Marks and Spencer's, Iceland and Waitrose have all made changes to their store hours. I think Iceland was the first one to do that. The luxury brands, which we mentioned, so LVMH, Burberry and Ferrari, they've changed their production, their factories to make hand sanitizer, surgical gowns, face masks. Ferrari's now making ventilators. Mercedes announced it's making breathing aids in collaboration with UCL. And you've got the likes of Brewdog and others also making sanitizer. And then first out the gates, we saw Pret and Leon as well, giving free drinks, I think, and discounted foods to NHS workers, which was really, I think, since then, a lot of other companies have done that. But it was interesting to see who was out of the gate first with these initiatives. And honesty, transparency is key, as we all know. Through all of these themes, there is this common thread that companies have to be open and honest about above all else. And false promises otherwise will be judged swiftly and brutally. We saw Travelodge agree to help the government house homeless people and then actually turn them out on the street with no alternative accommodation. McDonald's in the UK said to staff they'd stay open for takeaways, and then 24 hours later announced all the stores were to be closed. And to make matters worse, most staff members found out by social media. So it wasn't particularly good internal communications there. And Paul Richard Branson has had a bit of a rough ride. So Virgin Atlantic asked staff to take 6 weeks of unpaid leave. They also asked for a bailout from the government for £500 million. Richard Branson himself is only injecting 5% of his personal wealth into the Virgin Group. And there's been a lot of press about the fact that he doesn't pay tax since he moved to BVI 14 years ago. So there was not a very flattering article in The Guardian recently about that. But a lot of organisations have been applauded for following through on pledging support to their staff and communities. And I think it's really crucial at this time of uncertainty for organisations to not only make promises that they can keep, but to prioritise giving back over cutting costs.
So where does that leave us now? COVID is not an excuse to backslide, or post-COVID rather. While the disease itself has not discriminated, our response to the pandemic is already seeing certain groups suffer worse outcomes from it. A fifth of people working for the NHS in England are from an ethnic minority background, and they are disproportionately dying from the virus. In terms of gender equality, the UN has warned that limited gains made in past decades towards gender equality are now at risk of being rolled back. In the US, the Environmental Protection Agency has cut the mercury and air toxic standards, which regulates toxic emissions and saves around 11,000 lives a year. 80% of the areas worst affected by COVID are classified as high pollution zones, directly linking the virus to high levels, or the worst affected from the virus to high levels of pollution. There have been intentions under the guise of purpose being pledged since the early 2000s, and now will be the time that we see whether those intentions turn into action or retreat into climate negative capital spending. Our job as communicators is to take the responsible and proactive role in these times and to empower our clients with full understanding of solutions. We have to also be prepared for gaslighting, the ultimate gaslighting. Gaslighting is defined as a manipulation into doubting your own sanity. As the world figures out how to open back up, billions of dollars will be spent on messaging that will make people feel comfortable again. COVID-19 has brought to light all of the beautiful and painful truth of how we live. What a perfect time for paternal brands to help us feel normal again. But what is normal? At a time when people are vulnerable, we will do anything, spend anything, believe anything, just so that we feel that we've gone back to the familiar. Perhaps you'll feel convinced that air quality wasn't really that much cleaner, that those images were fake, hospitals weren't really like war zones, stories were hyperbole, and the numbers weren't as high as they sounded. But the reality is that those things are all true, and they are all currently true. The video we're about to show is a mashup of brand advertising designed to give comfort, to reassure people in times of chaos. But the feedback that we've had is that it's doing the opposite. It doesn't display brands that are future-proofing or leading or making positive change and purpose with purpose at their heart. It shows brands trying to provide comfort, but the discomfort is real. Roll VT.
I'm going to play this, hopefully this works.
When we first opened our doors.
Since 1926.
Since 1978.
For 60 years.
For 75 years.
For over 80 years. In 90 years.
Over 100 years. Nationwide has been on your side.
Restaurants have always been there for you. Nissan has been with you through thick and thin. We will do what we've always done.
Take care of people.
For people.
People.
People. People.
People.
Family.
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 Family. Family.
Family.
Family.
Family. Families. Families. Families.
Even now. Especially now. Especially now.
Right now.
Now more than ever.
More than ever.
Today, more than ever.
Today, more than ever.
Times like this.
At times like these, during these difficult times.
In these troubled times, challenging times, trying times, in these times of uncertainty,
During this time of great uncertainty.
during these uncertain times,
During these uncertain times.
Uncertain times.
in uncertain times, uncertain times,
Unprecedented times.
unprecedented times.
Unprecedented times.
This unprecedented moment in our history.
It's time of social distancing. While things have slowed down. As we turn more inside. While the doors may be closed.
arguments have gotten bigger.
The more we stay apart, we still find ways to stay close, even when we're apart.
Even if we can't stand closer than together.
Most work, school, and most importantly, to each other.
There's still ways.
All without leaving the comfort and safety of your home.
Without leaving the safety of your home.
Home.
Your home
Get
is
home.
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 Home. That's the key.
Buick and GMC are here to help. Con Edison is here to help. Here to help.
Our teams are here.
We are here. We're here. We're here.
Here for you. Here for you.
We're here for you.
We're here for you. We are here for you. We're here for you.
We are here for you.
We'll be here for you.
Runnings is here for you.
We're still here for you.
We're with you. We're part of your community.
So you can trust us.
You can count on us.
And we'll get through this. Together.
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 Together. Together.
Together.
Together.
Together. Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together. Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
Together.
MasterCard.
And here we are together. I know the majority of those in that mashup were US brands, as commented. I think though we all get the sense of what we're seeing, and I'm sure you as we feel something of the it needs action, not just words. Do we feel together? Certainly there is a lot of community work that's happening, and I don't know that kind of those kind of paternal brand messages are feeling so real anymore in this current climate, certainly not around things which are sentiment as opposed to action. So this brings us on to the fact that we have 10 years left of the Sustainable Development Goals. And in coming out of COVID-19, these are some of the things that we know. We know that the US have signed a 2.2 trillion aid bill into law. We know that the EU leaders have clashed over €1 trillion aid packages, but there will be a package. We know that China is planning to pump in a minimum of 2.8 trillion into their economy, with more to follow. Which projects will this money be directed into? Because we need to ensure at this time that we don't fall back on business habits driving us to a tipping point, that we take on the Sustainable Development Goals and we look at what they mean, not only at a corporate level, but at our own levels and where we can have impact and effect. This moment will fundamentally change everything, and it has given brands an opportunity to learn and implement the changes that they have talked about for years. To pivot into purpose is a choice, one that shifts the direction and narrative path for their future-proofing and their legacy as well as ours. Donut economics, as you can see from this slide, is, well, this is it, is an Oxford University visual framework for sustainable development. It combines the concept of planetary boundaries with the complementary concept of social boundaries. It's now being introduced in Amsterdam as they prepare to go back to work and they look to the future. It's being embraced as a starting point for public policy decisions, the first city in the world to make such a commitment, and hopefully not the last.
Great, thanks, Chloe. So just to sort of finish up really on our presentation, I think we were all agreed that it's unlikely that things are going to return to normal. And there's going to be a big shift, a different kind of capitalism, what we call stakeholder capitalism, and hopefully a different kind of society, which will help to create a more balanced, healthier, more climate conscious, community focused world that's really better for everyone. So we just wanted to end on this slide because I think it helps us to reflect on what our priorities should be, both as individuals and as communications professionals, and the possibilities for our future now that we have experienced such a different way of life. You've probably seen this on social media flying around, but I think it is important to take away what we've learned during this time and make sure that the next chapter is really motivated by our purpose to create a better world for ourselves, for business, and also for society. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you all for listening. I hope that was useful. I'd like to hand over to Kiri now, who's going to talk about the PRCA events and training, and then we're going to move on to questions. So we've got until 11 o'clock, so we've got about 15 minutes for questions. So please do send through any questions you have in the chat function. I've seen some coming through as we've been going along, so we will go through those. But if you've got anything else you'd like to ask, please do, as Kiri explained at the beginning, just write into your chat function.
Yeah, that was a great event. I really enjoyed it. So yes, we have some great training courses on offer. Danielle, if you could get the slide up. Thank you very much. Yeah, so guys, this is the International Summit. So I'll start with this one. So yeah, we have our International Summit coming up in May. If you would like to know more about this, please feel free to drop me an email, which I'll be dropping in the chat box. Danielle, would you mind going to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, so these are some of the great training courses we have with great discounts coming up this month and next month. And again, if you want to know more about this, please feel free to drop me an email and I can put you in touch with the correct person. Yep, so that's 50% of our training for April and May. So yeah, thanks guys for attending, and thank you to Danielle and Chloe for hosting the great event. I'll pass it back to you, Daniela.
Great, thanks, Kiri. So I think we just get back to the slide here. So we're going to go to questions now, and we're going to try and answer as many as we can in the time we have before then going back to the poll. Hopefully you've all had a chance to go onto Twitter and tweet your responses. I think Naomi, hopefully, and Izzy should be checking in with responses, so then we can announce those after the questions. I'm just going to go into the chat box here.
Might look at the first question that we received from Pandrake McKeon. A genuine question: at what point is it right, or is it ever right, to promote these various philanthropic acts, e.g. providing support for frontline workers or whatever? I'm deeply wary of the good news stories. Maybe I know too much. Any thoughts? Well, I have some thoughts on that, simply because I think people need both, well, two things. One, they need hope, and one, they need to see examples of things that are happening. So whilst we are all wary of purpose washing and greenwashing that has been talked about for a decade, I think it is really important to look at actually what that means at this time specifically, where we need more action and community action. And the fact that people can celebrate that, I don't think can be a negative thing. And as Daniela said in a number of her slides, we're also seeing the reverse of that. We're seeing things that are not being done well. We're seeing people who are not taking the right action. And we're seeing ways in which that that is being highlighted even more so as a kind of in juxtaposition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were along those lines as well, a couple of messages one from Simon Taylor and one from Leonie Foster. So Simon said there's a big difference between simply doing the right thing, preferably first, and telling everyone you're doing it. I'd like to think some of these brands are doing the former. And Leonie saying, I think you also have to have a solid history of doing the right thing as opposed to just shouting about it now. And I think that's a really, really valid point. I think, you know, there's a lot of people, a lot of organizations and people doing great things. But as long as it's consistent and it's something that maybe they've been, you know, if they've always been looking after their employees and they carry on looking after them, then it's going to have a lot more credibility than if they've been traditionally a bad employer and now all of a sudden they're shouting about how great an employer they are. So I think
I would say on that point though, that if this is the thing that it takes a company or an employer to jump off and start their good behavior, start looking at purpose, start questioning, and also, you know, yes, historically we have wanted businesses to do better, but I think we are not in a period of finger wagging. We really are in a period of looking at how do we make the world a better place, because we know that we were on a negative trajectory. So I don't think we can look too far back and go, well, they never helped their staff before and therefore they can't be good and this can't be real. If this is what it's taken, then let's embrace that and move forward with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, to Simon's point about, you know, doing the right thing, I think this is really important. We were actually talking with somebody from Oxford University, from the Centre of Corporate Reputation there, and he was talking about corporate humanity, about a lot of corporates just wanting to do the right thing and be sort of good corporate citizens in this time. You know, the likes of the companies who are making hand sanitizer, etc., doesn't mean that they're going to make hand sanitizer, they're going to, you know, change their whole purpose in the future. But it's an interesting question of, this is sort of a short-term behavior compared to what their long-term behavior is. Are they going to go back to making luxury goods, or are they going to rethink how they've helped benefited society now? And will people go back to those habits of buying luxury goods even? So I think there's a big question around there, which is interesting. Lots of comments from people about the video, about how nauseous it was and how it was particularly bad in the US. I think we've seen it. I think somebody pointed out, in terms of in the UK, we've seen it with supermarkets maybe, but certainly yes. Jem Kendrick saying uncertain times is definitely used an incredible amount. Yes, I feel like unprecedented times as well. I hear it all the time. Yeah. So there's definitely like a lot of similar messaging.
I also think that there is a different approach country to country, but I think we look at that approach of community and actually doing the job and what that job is, not just saying we're here for you, because we know that some of those brands are not actually there for either their employees or their customers at times like this. So I think that's some of the important stuff that we see. And I think also in terms of going back to whatever business as usual looks like, it may be that brands have paused in this time in order to shift to, whether that's making hand sanitizer or one of the other great things that we're seeing happen. But we're also seeing an opportunity to redress the balance of supply chains. We're also seeing, you know, suppliers not being able to send products, but also allowing us to question what those supply chains are and whether they're the right supply chain. So in order to move forward, I think that transparency around that and an opportunity to question that and put in those more stringent requirements is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also got a quote here from Andy. Hi, Andy Green, who said, quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson: "The louder a man talks about honor, the quicker I count the spoons." And I think you've also talked about purpose washing as well, which is something, as we say, is definitely an issue at the moment, but also in, you know, during normal times as well. Any other questions? We've got something from Yasmin, I think. The companies who have leaders with a huge media presence and personal wealth, like Branson, have been unfairly exemplified. Government bailouts are largely no strings. Lesser known corporate leaders need to be beware, as it will be them next. They too often have huge personal wealth, and when the redundancies start to roll, their reputation's authenticity around purpose versus profit authenticity will be scrutinized. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I do think it's been quite an interesting conversation around the whole bailouts, and I know that the airline industry as well, in particular, has been really really faced with that. I saw BA having to make 12,000 cuts yesterday, and I think, I mean, yeah, that's the problem, is that yeah, there is a risk of reputation, particularly you know, corporate leaders as well as the, you know, people with personal wealth, and I think there is that debate around the authenticity around purpose versus profit. It will be scrutinized more and more, and I think as we come out of this crisis, we'll see more and more scrutiny around business leaders and how they're handling things.
I think as well it talks to, you know, the things that were struggling before. Airlines were struggling before. High Street was struggling before. You know, there are questions that we need to take into, you know, our whole world has changed very rapidly through technology and whether some of the industries have caught up or not. And is this a moment for bailout or for questioning of, are they fit for purpose, or are these sticking plasters of bailouts, in which case that needs to be addressed. But these are bigger questions around how we approach things, which is why it's interesting to see Amsterdam looking at the donut economics and really kind of being able to have a yardstick to measure by, rather than going back into something which is, we've got a financial hole that we need to fill. Actually, how do you fit into a future that looks like this? And therefore, yes, we can bail out this much, or yes, we can kind of fix things to this extent, but you have to shift some of your behavior. I mean, obviously with airlines, it's a much bigger question, but it's an interesting area to look into with both airlines, high streets, and also some of the things that we're seeing rolling back, like the mercury in soil in the US, and the rolling back of those regulations at a time when actually we probably need them more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. We've probably got time for a couple more questions. I see there's one from Rory and Leonie. So Rory, it's a difficult balance for bigger corporates. They're expected to communicate how they're responding to the crisis by consumers and investors, but from a comms perspective, they're often advised not to comment unless they can provide tangible evidence of a purpose-led response that matches their longer-term brand ethos. How do you suggest they strike a balance? Yeah, I mean, this is always tricky. And I think, I mean, not just in terms of, comms advisors, but then you have the legal advice as well, which is always much more on the cautious side, erring on the side of caution in terms of what companies should be saying or not saying. I think, and again, it comes down to, how purpose-driven an organization is to start with. It's much easier. I think we've seen from the brands that are really purpose-driven, it's much easier for them to get out the gates first with a valid response and have more credibility than those who maybe don't have so much experience in that space. I think it comes down to staying aligned with their original purpose and how they can respond as they would normally in a normal situation, but it will just have to be a quicker response in time of crisis, but to keep that sort of authenticity and alignment with their core values and who they are as a business and as a brand, in terms of trying to get that balance right. Chloe, I don't know if you want to add anything or.
No, that's great.
There's a question from Leonie. There's going to be a lot more noise on social impact of companies as they fight for space during recovery. Is it more effective for companies to act collectively, for example, through industry organizations or groups than individually? For larger businesses, it's not such an issue, but for mid-size, getting that share of voice is perhaps more difficult. Any thoughts? I
think one thing that's really come up a lot is community. And I think the other thing that is really interesting is how many times I've heard, and I'm sure other people listening have, that things that were planned to take 2 or 3 years to change have changed in a matter of weeks, whether that be working from home, whatever that might look like for a business. But those are I've seen industries or companies coming together to ask questions and ask advice of each other in a way that I haven't seen for, I don't think, ever. And I think that that's a really positive thing. And I think those things are industry wide. I think even if we look at kind of the automotive industry and the pivot to the electrification of the automotive industry and the discussions around that, all of these things are a moment of questioning. So I think it's, in answer to your question, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a proud moment where different areas of industry can stand together and look at how they change together. But I hear you on the share of voice, and I think still we celebrate the individual. We celebrate the way that different brands speak to us with different voices and different tones. I think people just want to know that the work that's being done is collectively positive.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think what we've seen with a lot of our clients as well is, that acting collectively whether that's an informal alliance or a formal coalition, I think is really important. And particularly if you've got different, as you say, maybe mid-size businesses that, you know, are struggling to get that share of voice, getting organizations from different sectors, I suppose, and different areas that can pool different resources. And so we've worked a lot with maybe an NGO that then teams up with a private sector company or public sector, and you have that different expertise, different resources, whether that's financial or human, and finding, you know, what everyone brings to the table that can really add value and that allows them to have a bigger share of voice, collaborating together. I think maybe there's actually just one last question, which maybe we could do, and then we can just flick to the poll. From Jem, internally, we've been talking a lot about COVID fatigue. I think a lot of people are getting tired of the repeated similar messaging people are putting out because they feel they have to. At what point do you think people should set the now aside and just operate however they're able? I think that's a really good question. I think everyone's having a bit of COVID fatigue, even though there's still a way to go, and we've still got another, whatever, week and a half left of lockdown, as far as we know. But I think, yeah, there is definitely an element of, you know, we just have to get on with whatever we can do, be as purpose driven as we can, and really, you know, really stay true to your values, whether it's, you know, personal, professional, you know, the business values, and the business purpose. But there is a bit of the fact that we are in a crisis, and you just have to operate as best you can in the current environment. Chloe, I don't know if you've heard.
I would agree. I think that setting the now aside is a hard thing when we don't have an exit plan, and I think that has been the kind of crisis call to the government around what happens next and how do we come through this. I think while there is, I think that there does need to be, you know, we are hit constantly through every form of media with numbers and the same thing over and over again, and in hunting for more information or wider information or information that isn't related to COVID, it's really quite a dig to find, you know, even things that are going on with human rights that we're not talking about in a lot of the media that that is being actively consumed. So I think that I think there will be some time of the kind of the COVID shadow will last a long time, and I think where we are currently is a point where everyone feels like they need to know the next bite-sized piece of information. So while that's happening, I think brands are talking to that and to the best of their ability in that context. But I would hope very much that we are also coming out with, and I feel that this is very much where brands can take a lead, is that we're looking at what that recovery plan looks like, not in the $2.2 trillion of investment, etc., but actually on the day-to-day way that we come through making the world a better place.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time for questions. Just very quickly before we round up, we've got the results from the poll here. Do go on Twitter. You can have a look at the results there as well, I think, hopefully. So the first question, when returning to business as usual after COVID, what aspects of life would you like to keep? Working from home, 35.3%. Less traffic, 11.8%. Higher paid key workers, 47.1%. And less air travel, 5.9%. So definitely higher pay for key workers is key. Progress on which social issue is most at risk due to COVID? Mental health, 59.4%, gender equality, 3.1%, racial equality, 15.6%, and climate change, 21.9%. So definitely mental health having the biggest impact there. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the last question, has your opinion of certain companies been changed by how they've responded to the crisis? A resounding 93.5% have said yes, and only 6.5% have said no, and no don't knows. So I think we've got a few hours left for people to vote if they wanted to carry on the voting, and then we'll be sharing that on Twitter. So any comments or thoughts you have, please do add. Thank you all very much for joining. It's been really interesting, really great questions from everyone. We really appreciate taking the time. So thank you very much, and thank you, Kiri, for organising it.
No worries, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to the PRCA.
Cheers. Thank you, Daniela, Chloe. That was a great event.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.